I'm going to say good afternoon. It's just about the hour, and welcome to Many Paths, Many Visions, brought to you by the Labyrinth Society and with your host, Christiana Brinton. Today, Lars Howlett, former TLS Web Chair, the World Labyrinth Day Coordinator, Master Labyrinth Designer, Builder, and Teacher, and a workshop presenter this year, is joining me to talk about his workshop topic on the subject of diversity. If you are joining us on this GoToMeeting session, please mute your sound by clicking on the microphone icon in the upper left of the GoToMeeting control panel that will appear on your computer screen once you log in. If you call in by phone, of course, you will not see this, but just keep as quiet as possible. And you can unmute yourselves and ask questions during the Q&A session at the end of the interview in the last 15 minutes. So if you still need to find the GoToMeeting invitation, it's posted on the TLS Facebook page, in the global group on Facebook, and on the Labyrinth Society website under media. So this episode is called Stepping Forward with Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the Labyrinth Community. Lars Howlett recently completed professional diversity training and used this to help facilitate his World Labyrinth Day webinar sharing circles with members of the international labyrinth community. Greetings, Lars. Welcome to Many Paths, Many Visions. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Christiana. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, this is, very, very germane and appropriate. So let's get right into it. First of all, I really want to know, I got two questions right off the bat. What is professional diversity training, and why did you decide to take this training?
Well, it's something that's been on my mind since I began walking labyrinths and going to events, with Veritas and the Labyrinth Society. And just the homogeneity of the people that attend events and walks. And so when I was asked to become the World Labyrinth Day chair, I thought, what a great opportunity to get a sense of the spread of labyrinths in the world and to help cultivate that and foster it. So I jumped at that and have really enjoyed being the coordinator for World Labyrinth Day. This is our 10th anniversary, actually. So TLS is celebrating its 20th, and the World Labyrinth Day, which is a event created by the Labyrinth Society before my time. I've done the last 5 years, but it's celebrating 10 years now. So when I came on as the chair, I decided to create a survey to get a sense of who actually is walking and where they are. And this is a Google informal survey, but it allowed me to kind of begin counting people and states and countries. And so, at first I got really excited when, we had 15 countries and 40 states. And, I really felt, wow, this is a global event. This is really wonderful. And I started creating maps where I would shade in different countries as someone, participated. So you'd have a world map or a United States map with each state filled in. And I was trying to fill in, the entire United States and world eventually. But as it went on, I realized it was a little bit misleading because, maybe there'd be one walk in Russia and I'd shade in the entire country of Russia. And so it was a little misleading to say that it was a truly global event, because if you looked at the pinpoints of where all the participants were, still the vast majority were in the United States and Canada. And so that really got me thinking, how can we really reach a wider audience and truly reflect the mission of the Labyrinth Society in terms of a global reach. And at the 2014 gathering in Florida, I believe it was Sig Lonergan stood up and said, look to your left, look to your right. And think about who's here, but also try to think about who's not here, and begin to ask yourself, why aren't they here? And that was a real wake-up call for me to think about, often we think about, well, we're counting who's included, who's there, but it's harder to think about, well, who's not there, who's not included. And I, on the board of TLS through the web chair, I really got into that, trying to promote, through the Facebook group and through YouTube and other channels to try to reach out to a broader audience. But I decided this year that I needed to take it a step further and try to really figure out a way to engender greater diversity in our community, because it really didn't seem like what we were doing was having that big of an impact. I mean, there was some impact, but it's still the case where the majority of the people that attend and organize and present at Veritas and Labyrinth Society events are very similar in their background.
Very similar demographic.
Yeah. And so diversity training is something that I discovered online. I was actually listening to a podcast in this community called Awarepreneurs, and they are people that are trying to move forward in the mindfulness community and coaching and thinking about these issues. How do we broaden our, clients, but then also how do we create more equitable frameworks so that more people can be involved? And then how do we all benefit from, greater diversity of backgrounds and perspectives in our communities? Because it's not just the Labyrinth community, but it's the yoga community. It's many different mindfulness meditation communities that, mostly white, older, often female participants are involved. So this is a course run by Desiree Adaway, and it's called Diversity is an Asset. And it was a 5-week online course for an hour and a half each week. And it was co-taught by Erica Hines and Jessica Fish, which are together they are 3 experts in diversity training for organizations and individuals. And basically they walk you through, the definitions, the frameworks, the biases, and then, how to begin to address these issues and operationalize, a diversity plan that has accountability.
Okay, so in light of this training, what do the terms inclusivity, diversity, and equity mean to you in general to you, and then in the context of Labyrinth use and community?
Yeah, well, this is where I really realized the value of diversity training, because actually Desiree Adaway hates the word diversity, even though that's the name of her course. And the reason she dislikes it is because we often get hung up on diversity, and diversity really is a numbers game. It is, and I'm really echoing her words here. It's a numbers game where, it's just who is present in the room. And if they are from a variety of different backgrounds with different characteristics, then you have, diversity. Inclusion is taking it a step further, where you create an environment where people of different backgrounds feel welcome, respected, and supported, so that they can fully participate. And then equity is actually going even a step further and looking at fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement for everyone. So you're really striving to this is a quote here, to identify and eliminate barriers that have prevented the full participation of some groups. So really, you're beginning to look at the structural reasons that you are lacking, in this diversity in your organization. So how does that look in a Labyrinth community? That's something that I'm excited to think about, and I'm just beginning that journey myself. This is not something you do overnight. Clearly, it's a step-by-step thing. But if you had a labyrinth walk, a diverse labyrinth walk would be one in which there were many different people from many different backgrounds, on the labyrinth together. An inclusive labyrinth walk would be one where, maybe the event was held in an urban area so that it was easily accessible by public transportation. It was at a venue that had a labyrinth that was wheelchair accessible. It might have finger labyrinths available for people that are visually impaired. It might have a variety of designs available for people with different abilities also, the language and the venue itself would be more open to people from different backgrounds. So basically, when you create the Labyrinth Walk, you are beginning to consider how can all these different people feel more welcomed and able to participate. And then an equitable Labyrinth Walk would be one where you actually involve people from different backgrounds in the process of creating the event. So I might, instead of just organizing and facilitating the event myself, I would try to invite 2 or 3 other people to participate in organizing the event, and they would be different than I was, in their background. And then, the facilitator might be different. You'd have 3 different facilitators. And then, you could have a sliding scale. If it was a paid event, you might have a cost sliding scale where it was, if you were charging, it could be no one turned away for lack of funds, things of that nature.
So, but labyrinths in themselves, I mean, do you agree that as design elements and contemplative tools, they're not inherently exclusive or unjust or uniformly appealing only to a limited sector of the human population? It's how we are using these.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And we almost all of us say that the labyrinth is an open experience, available to everybody, and that everybody, would likely have the ability to have a positive experience on the labyrinth. But, then the question is, well, why is it then that our events are, 95%, of the same background and characteristics, and I think especially when we begin to go abroad or into specific communities, I think we do need to ask the question, is the labyrinth appropriate for this community? Because maybe there are communities where labyrinths are not appropriate. I'm not sure that it is 100%, applicable to everybody in every place. And so there is part of this, when you're doing work like this, you do want to meet people where they're at, and you want to ask them what their needs are, and be careful not to just bring a labyrinth to a community, without thinking about how can I adapt it, or even ask them if it is something that they could utilize before you bring them to it.
Mm-hmm. And it could be, yes, and the solution could be just in a different design, or how it's laid out, or what are the extra pieces that you have that allow that particular community to walk easily and with some facility, some ease and comfort and movement. this, that you have to, then you look at that, just in terms of the creation of the labyrinth itself, first of all.
Yeah, as a designer and builder, I
Yeah.
have really tried to experiment with as many different designs as possible, with as many different materials as possible, as many different intentions as possible. And I'm a huge proponent that, the 11th Circuit Chart Labyrinth in stone is not the best labyrinth for everybody in all situations. And I'm really beginning to promote, the use of the classical labyrinth, the use of Baltic wheel, the use of different materials, because I think there has been a kind of a jump to the Chart labyrinth for a lot of people without even considering other design options. And I think it's important to raise awareness of the variety of designs that are available, because I think they can be better suited to other groups. And something that was really fascinating that came of these sharing circles was I did one sharing circle on Latin America with 4 different guests from Central and South America. And when they presented, each of them presented for 15 minutes. None of them were using the Chart labyrinth. And, I thought, well, maybe the Chart labyrinth isn't applicable in all situations. But here, in my entire presentation, my guests from Latin America, none of them were using the Chart labyrinth. They were all using other designs. And I thought, well, that's really telling. If I'm going to South America, clearly like the Chart labyrinth is not the number one. I mean, it's not even number 2 or number 3 in terms of what people are working with down there.
Okay, so this speaks to my next question. So, what do you think are, or what have you discovered are some of the underlying factors in your group, in your webinars, and in your training, the underlying factors that hinder inclusivity and diversity and equity with respect to labyrinth use and the labyrinth community?
Well, it's hard to pinpoint, but I think a lot of it is that we're kind of working on our own, and we have our own experience, and I think it's easy to present your experience instead of realizing that there are different ways for different people, to walk the labyrinth. And I think through facilitator training and through workshops, we kind of get into these frameworks for presenting, especially, around the way we walk. A lot of people, it's a slow meditation, walking meditation, but, why not have a walk that's all dancing, or why not have a walk that's all singing, or some other opportunity to experience the labyrinth that's not simply, a slow meditative quiet walk. Some of the responses that I had back were people, expressing, I think a lot of them focused on youth. They saw the future of the labyrinth in youth, and they believe, I think it's easier to work with youth because youth are more open-minded to other ideas, and they'll even force you. And you try to have a slow meditative walk with youth, then they'll start pushing that, in a different direction. So I think that's one place. Another thing that came up was working with indigenous communities, First Nations, Native Americans. People were interested in how to do that. I think there is a hesitancy because people don't want to make a mistake. They don't want to offend somebody. And so it's a difficult conversation to have, and it's an uncomfortable space to put yourself in because you are going outside your comfort zone. But you need to go outside your comfort zone so that other people will have that comfort. Otherwise, you're staying in your comfort zone and you're asking everybody else to be uncomfortable in your space instead of being uncomfortable in theirs.
So, okay. So many questions. Okay, I'm just gonna continue with this. So to me, there's like a chicken and the egg, or the cart before the horse, or what started first, the aspect to this problem. What came first? So there's foundational issues such as basic accessibility parameters. There is religious biases. There are ethnic biases. There are economic biases or hindrances. So that might have to be addressed first on a case by case basis before you can have these other issues addressed, because as you said, like in South America, the interest in the desire to use a certain type of labyrinth that you think is something that is so worldwide, like the Chart labyrinth, that is not being used down there, can also point to a desire to be more authentic with the indigenous population in Central and South America. That there wasn't, but on the other hand, you have, so there, there's a lot of layers here. There's a lot of layers to look at. There's a lot of layers to address, in terms of, how do you start? Do you go into your community and get them involved, and then say, well, is a labyrinth appropriate in this way? And if so, how do we create inclusivity, diversity, and equity if we want to bring this into the community?
Yeah, I think you want to be careful not to jump into action without going first through awareness and analysis. And this is a framework that they suggest. Desiree Adaway it's called liberatory consciousness, and it's a 4-part framework. And it is a bad idea just to go, rushing into a place without, first thinking about what is your intention and trying to gain awareness as to what is already being done there, And so you do have to take time to research, like if you're going to work with an African American community, you want to see, well, what other African American communities are working with the labyrinth? And it's as easy as a Google search in some cases, where I went on YouTube and searched African American labyrinth, and I found 2 or 3 YouTube videos about African American communities creating labyrinths for themselves. And then you can see names of people, and you could contact them and ask them, how did this go? What was your challenges and successes? And then you need analysis as well. So we begin with awareness, which we're attuned to as labyrinth people. That's like right there in the forefront of everything we do, is awareness and intention. And then analysis, to really think about what you've learned through your research and your relationships, and to consider what direction or what approach would be best. And then the next 2 steps would be action, and then eventually allyship and accountability in what you do.
What was that next allyship? What is that?
So allyship is, well, let's start with action. So awareness first, analysis second. Action is how you actually, begin the process of whatever it is you're doing, whether it's, the organization, the labyrinth walk, the gathering, you put that plan into place. And then allyship and accountability is, how do you stand in solidarity with those groups, because maybe you still are an outsider, but you can ally yourself with them. And white people can ally themselves with people of color in situations because white people have privilege and power that in some situations or in many situations, people of color don't have. So as an ally, you can use your privilege and power to support, the work or the injustice that you see happening in this community. But it's an ongoing process. Like, to be an ally is not a title you claim. It's something that you do, like love. It's not like you have love. You have to actually work at love nonstop, pretty much. So you become an ally to that group. And then accountability is to actually look at, does your plan or strategy, is it being implemented? Is it being successful? How can we continue to refine this? And, what are the results?
Yeah, is it benefiting the community?
Right.
More to the point, yeah, is it beneficial?
Uh-huh.
And is it being accepted and enjoyed by the community? Yeah, I mean, that's more than anything else. Is it working? Yeah, for the community
Mm-hmm.
itself. Because I think also the other part of that, you want it to be a pebble in the pond effect. You want, okay, it's working here, let's do it here and here and here and here. Let's
Right.
keep it going. Let's keep this. If this model works, let's bring it to other places.
Well, hopefully it spreads organically. I mean,
Yeah.
the best strategy would be one that really empowers people in that community to be the ones to create their own labyrinth walks and events, and then they inspire other people, because it's not the situation where it's like, I want to be the one to bring the labyrinth to all these people.
Yeah.
I want to pass the torch so that they can pass the torch and they can pass the torch. And that's where it's like, I'm not just looking at diversity of people at the event or in the labyrinth. We need diversity on all levels. We need diversity in the board of directors. We need it in the keynote speakers. We need it in the presenters. We need it in the facilitators. We need it in the volunteers, and then we need it, in the people that are participating.
Yeah, I'll get back to that discussion, but let's talk about your gathering workshop. It's titled "All Walks of Life: Embodying Equity and Inclusion," and it seems from your description that participants they'll be given instructions in how to promote diversity in their own workshops and labyrinth walks. So, what do these guidelines entail? What will this entail?
Well, this is something I'm working on. So, and I want people to contribute to it. So it's not just like, this is Lars's handbook on how to create a diverse walk. I want people to come up with ideas and suggestions. And I think your interview with Frank was really mind-opening, eye-opening, in terms of that regard. I mean, Frank is a great example of creating a labyrinth walk for a specific community and using the labyrinth to really, create a powerful experience for that, underrepresented community in the labyrinth world. But, so I will also provide suggestions and advice, for people. Like, I would suggest people expand their networks. And if you realize that you don't know many people of color or, gay, lesbian, or people that are disabled, or youth, you should begin to follow these people on Facebook and social media so that you can see what they're doing. You should work to listen to podcasts and hear from these different people that have different perspectives. One of the things we did in our diversity training was we actually followed, a number of people on Facebook from a different background than we are. And you can actually choose like 20 people that you want to appear first in your newsfeed. And so I intentionally chose 20 people of color and other backgrounds to appear first in my newsfeed, and that's actually been the way my Facebook feed has been in the last 3 months. The workshop ended, but I continued it that way just because it's so helpful to see their perspective in terms of what's going on. And so I do want to develop a list of people working in these different communities. So like, you know, these are people that have worked in facilitating, you know, African American walks. This is people that have worked with the gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans community. This is people that have worked with disabled community. This is people that have worked with youth, you know, and then you'd have this list, a resource guide of people that you could follow and listen to. You know, your podcasts are a great resource for people. Like when I did the Latin American thing, I went on and listened to your interviews with Ronald Esquivel and Jose Cuesta, so I could, you know, hear their perspective with your podcast. So that was really helpful to me. So, you know, those are just two examples, and there's more. There's a lot more we can do.
Mm-hmm. So the last sentence of your description, it says, you say, this is to broaden your awareness and resources for facilitating walks and leading workshops that engender diversity. So is this so are you wanting to see Labyrinth facilitators and people who work with Labyrinths do you think that diversity should be the number one priority when creating Labyrinth events and activities? And because there's such a broad range of Labyrinth usage nowadays. People do this very privately on their own labyrinths. They do it for their spiritual groups. They do it for their community. You know, if they're a nurse practitioner, they'll bring a labyrinth into their patients, or they're a healing touch practitioner and they work in hospitals, they'll bring hand labyrinths in. You know, sometimes these, and so lots of times, even though we don't hear about it, TLS doesn't hear about it, it doesn't get broadcast in the news or anything. They are using these in more diverse ways than we know about or we have any knowledge of to a great degree.
Well, I don't know. I think we give ourselves more credit than is deserved. I think. I mean, we like to say that labyrinths are in every corner of the globe, you know, that labyrinths are mainstream. But, you know, if you look at the numbers, it just does. There's huge swaths of areas where either labyrinths aren't there. Not that they need to be everywhere, but, you know, I think it's kind of. I think we overestimate the spread and use of labyrinths, where the reality is that, you know, 95% of labyrinths are used in pretty similar ways by pretty similar people. And, you know, if you look at even the membership of the Labyrinth Society, 82% of TLS members are from the United States. And if you include the UK, Canada, and Australia, 96% of our members are from, you know, those 4 countries. Mm-hmm. So, and the same thing with the locator. You know, if you look at the total, you know, 5,700 labyrinths, 75% of those are in the United States. And if you include Canada, England, Australia, and South Africa, that's up to 88% of the labyrinths on the locator. Mm-hmm. But of course, there are labyrinths that are not on the locator. And you're right, there's people that we don't know what they're doing with the labyrinth and where they're doing it. And that's the awareness part. And that's where I was really trying. And I think we all need to, you know, really try to get a better sense of where labyrinths are being used and how, and really kind of spotlight those places that we don't hear about. Because when do we hear about people in Central and South America walking labyrinths? Like hardly ever do we hear from those people. And they are doing it. I mean, they're not doing it in every single city, but, you know, I do want to hear from those people. And I think that's really valuable to understand what they're doing. And the same thing with a nurse who's quietly working away in the back corner of her, you know, nursing home or whatever. You know, we can learn from them. And I'm also not saying, so your original question was, you know, should this be the number one priority for every person? And I don't think it should be the number one priority, but I do think it is the responsibility of everybody. I don't think that this is going to happen just by, one committee or, one gathering theme, focused on this is not going to do it. I think we all need to take the responsibility, especially if you have power and privilege in the Labyrinth world. If you are someone that creates events, gives presentations, organizes conferences, then it's even more important that you use your power and privilege to prioritize creating a more equitable and inclusive community.
So how do your workshop participants examine their social, religious, ethnic biases? Because if we don't examine our own, we as facilitators or board directors, board members, or TLS members, whatever, if we don't examine our own, how do we then, make that jump? If we have to expose limitations people place on their labyrinth creations that hinder or suppress diversity and inclusivity. I mean, this right. Can be. So, are you using the labyrinth in this case to deal with this kind of confrontational subject matter? Is this something that should be something that we all, as a part of our labyrinth process of being introduced to labyrinth, walking labyrinths, what comes up for us, etc., examining this so that then when we can become more effective in making our workshops and our events more inclusive and equitable?
Yeah, I think, if you want to make change in the world, you need to change yourself first, and so a lot of the reason that we're in this situation is our own shortcomings and our own bias and our own inability to realize the perspective and space that other people are living in. And so it is challenging. It's an uncomfortable conversation. I'd rather just, when I wanted to create this presentation, I just wanted to have a walk of anything but walking, actually. I wanted to do a labyrinth walk where you weren't allowed to walk. You had to do other things like dancing or singing or, and then on the other hand, I felt this responsibility to really look at this issue straight on, which is uncomfortable. And then I thought, well, what if we do both? What if we have a labyrinth walk that's experiential, where people are forced to walk the labyrinth in a way that's different than the way they usually do? And then let that be a point of self-reflection on how does it feel to walk a labyrinth in a different way than you normally do? And how does it feel to be around other people walking the labyrinth in a variety of different ways? So my hope would be that everybody in the workshop, I'm going to try to invite people to experience the labyrinth in a way that they haven't done it before, and then to experience what it's like when there's a variety of everybody on the labyrinth that's actually walking in different ways. And it's looking at your shadow self, and part of the labyrinth, the benefit of the practice is to look at your shadow side. And I can admit that when I started building labyrinths, I thought, well, handicapped accessibility is a nice thing, but what if there's only one person that's going to come and walk it, who's handicapped? And, you can see my bias right there in the way I'm talking about this, because I'm saying maybe there'll only be one handicapped person to come walk the labyrinth, And so, not everyone is able to walk the labyrinth, number one. And number two, if I go along with that thinking, then I'm just going to create labyrinths saying, well, there's probably only one or two people, that are handicapped that might come to this labyrinth, and why should we make such a big effort for them? Mm-hmm. But then, the awareness around that is that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I create inaccessible labyrinths, then yeah, there's not going to be many people that are handicapped that go walk those labyrinths.
Yeah.
But if I create an accessible labyrinth, then the opportunity is that there probably will be many more people that visit the labyrinth of different abilities. And so when I created that labyrinth for the Earl Baum Institute, last month for the Center for the Blind that Maya talked about, she facilitated the walk, 2 weeks ago. That was such a powerful experience to be on a labyrinth where the intention of the labyrinth was around accessibility. And there were 7 or 8 people on the labyrinth that were all visually impaired together, in the space, not just one or, and so they were the majority and I was the minority. And I realized, I can walk any labyrinth because I'm abled, but they cannot walk any labyrinth. So why not create more accessible labyrinths? Because able-bodied people can walk any labyrinth that's there, but disabled people, they need that opportunity if they're going to be able to walk a labyrinth.
Yeah, so the trick is so what I'm hearing is that if we could put our own biases, which are constraints on our creativity, we will never create something for that is inclusive and diverse and fair, equitable. As
Yeah.
long as we constrain ourselves, and some of that, I have to say, some of that. I mean, you're talking about people the disability or the challenges that they face are obvious. They have guide dogs, they walk with a cane, they, it is obvious. But there are many people who are disabled, who have challenges that are not that. They are highly sensitive people. They are sensitive to smells, and so when you create, for instance, when you create a labyrinth and you have incense,
Right.
and you're smudging, people
Yeah.
can't. People say, I can't do that. Can't be there. Can't do that.
Yeah.
I am highly sensitive. I can't walk with people with, well, all the perfumes on and everything and a touch of tight space. So, there's a lot of issues for people out there that are not obvious. And so that
Right.
is something also to be very aware of when we're looking at, and I think this is one of the things, I don't know about you, but I have walked there was actually one in Southern California that I walked, that they had to have their chart labyrinth, but it was a small area that they put it in. It was a 32-foot, and so the paths were so narrow that when you walked it, you got really dizzy walking around those
Mm-hmm.
turns. The turns were so sharp and
Yeah.
so hard to walk that I, even as a able-bodied, quote unquote able-bodied, had a real hard time
Yeah.
walking that. And this is something that really definitely needs to be looked at closely, because I've heard people say, "Oh no, I can't walk that." We just had this happen in Denton with Clive Johnson on his "Oh no, I can't walk that. I get too dizzy. I can't walk that.
Mm.
I get too dizzy." And it wasn't his labyrinth is not a short labyrinth. It's a
Mm-hmm.
Baltic wheel. So there's wide open areas that the kids were running and stuff, but immediately that was the reaction of someone who came up to look. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, it is, we have to be very aware of our own biases and how that gets translated into the actual design and how we conduct our workshops, and be very aware that there are lots of people out there who is not obvious, that their challenges are not obvious. We need to honor that as well, I think.
Yeah, we do need greater awareness into those areas and be wary of our assumptions, because that example of the incense, just came up in the regional reps Facebook group with rose water, and everybody in the walk was instructed to, sprinkle rose water on the person behind you and pass the bowl. And so it really was like, and this person was sensitive to scents, and so it was a very uncomfortable situation to be in for this person. And so, they are beginning. I think the regional reps began a committee around this, um, around sensitivity to that issue. And then another one is also cultural appropriation, which is another thing that they're looking at, when, how does it feel if you're from India and you come and you participate in a labyrinth walk where, white people are wearing saris and saying namaste, it feels a little odd in that situation. So what is the appropriateness of using other cultures and faiths and traditions in labyrinth work?
Yeah, because you have, I mean, this is so, it's sort of like, how do you generalize ways to create labyrinth events and workshops that feature inclusive and diverse populations that are equitable when this variety of issues is so complex? I mean, you have large social inequities and multi-generational problems, and there can be very specific to a region or a
Yeah.
locale or a sector of society. I mean, this is a huge.
Yeah, well, don't get stuck on that, because I think it is overwhelming, and people, feel like, how are they going to please everybody? You can't please everyone all the time. But, you go back to intention, go back to what is your intention for the walk? Who's going to be walking, and who is the community, if you're working with a specific, like, gay male, community, then you have a different approach, than if you're doing a public walk in the town square, or, if you are going into an African American community. So you don't want to make every walk exactly the same, because that's going to, make them, it's going to lose the power there. So you do want to tailor the walk. But you also want to keep it open so that, you can be ready when people show up that don't have the background that you expected, like having a finger labyrinth available for someone who says, oh, I can't walk that labyrinth. Well, they say, well, here's a finger labyrinth, or so.
Yeah, well, Clive did that. He had his wooden finger labyrinth, and so he gave it to the
Great.
woman, and she sat. Yeah.
So
So
there's a solution. Yeah.
yes.
So, but not all facilitators carry finger labyrinths, but
No.
I think that is a good thing to do.
Yeah. So
Can I say something?
it's 12:40. Yeah, I'm just gonna
No?
excuse me. I'm just gonna invite people to talk right now. It is 12:46. So please just say your name and where you're from, and then ask Lars a question. Thank you.
Okay. I'm Annie Firego, and I've been listening a lot. I think that when we're working with other people and we're working with diverse people, it's often, I mean, I've been a designer for many years, not just of labyrinths, but of other things. For me, the important thing is to allow whoever I'm working with, whoever I'm designing for, to make sure that they own the piece that I'm designing. So I will work with them on what their symbols are, what's important to them. Labyrinth is a symbol, so I try to work that symbol, their symbolism, into that piece, whatever it is. So then they own whatever it is that they are working with, and it's not mine, or it's not, somebody else's, or it's not whatever that is. It ends up becoming, I mean, if they're going to own this piece of the symbol that they're going to be working with, that they end up owning it.
Yeah, I think that's important. Thanks, Annie. I think that it is a important thing for labyrinth builders and even facilitators to realize that this is not about you. This is about other people experiencing their own experience, and the labyrinth is going to have a life of its own. So, when we design and create labyrinths, we're really just helping guide that person to create their own space, and then it becomes theirs. It's not ours after we finish it. And the same thing on a labyrinth walk. You're not really trying to give people your experience. You're trying to really provide them an opportunity to have their own experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in a bigger context, you invite the participants to own this experience, to own this event, that they are contributing, they are being contributed to. This is their event or their community that this event is a part of. and so it's not something you're doing. You are holding space, you are facilitating the walk, but it's not yours. That
Right.
makes
The other thing I wanted,
go
the
ahead,
other thing I wanted to mention was cultural appropriation is a tricky term, and I'm sure it's something that's going to sort of be defined as we go. It's not just, it's hard to explain. Cultural appropriation is when you take something from somebody else and you use it in your own work and you make money from it. And you, like there's a lot of, or you use it legally, or you trademark it, or you do something that it's like you're literally stealing that person's identity is what you're doing. So if you're wearing clothes, I mean, we live in a global world. So, I mean, if you're, wearing something that looks like if you're wearing something that looks like a sari or scarf or whatever it is, that's not really cultural appropriation, but it has to be something that's much more serious than that for it to be considered cultural appropriation. And it is without their permission.
Yeah.
If you're doing it without their permission. So that's really important.
Yeah, that's a great clarification. Yeah, I appreciate that, Annie, because I don't have a lot of, I haven't looked at appropriation, and that's not really a part of this diversity training that I did. It's something that came up on the regional reps. So I probably provided a bad example, but I appreciate that. And it is something that, the yoga community, I mean, for part of this, I'm looking at other mindfulness communities to see what are they doing. And you can find great examples like Spirit Rock Meditation Center here in the Bay Area is going through a huge process of how do we, engender greater diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in a meditation, but the yoga community is also going through this. And so you can very quickly look at other communities and see how they're responding. And sometimes they're responding, gracefully, and sometimes they're making huge mistakes. And it's like, whoa, we want to really be careful to avoid, this situation that's happening here,
I agree.
Yeah, I have an example. I made a man in the maze labyrinth in the desert in Arizona years ago, and it was right next to the Amarin Institute in Dragoon, Arizona. And I was just called to do it there. It was a very spiritual, sacred place. I felt the sacredness of it. It was like my hair in the back of my arms stood up, and I was working. I literally with the spirits of this place. It's a long story, but I was asked to place this labyrinth there very, very clearly. Taoist asked, very clear, but when I went to check with the Amarin Institute, which is a small private museum they have unearthed archaeological sites from the Hohokam indigenous tribes and all around. And I said to them, is it permissible for me to open up the center so that people can just stand in this small center? And the woman, well, that's not a man in the maze, and she was not happy with me. She was upset with me, and I said, okay. And this was she was an administrator at the Institute, not as far as I could tell in First Nations, but very, very clear and adamant that was not to be used that way, that the man in the maze, symbol was a symbol of their, mythology, and it was closed. That centerpiece was closed. I was like, okay, got it. Got the message. Thank you very much. I hear you loud and clear. So I had to be mindful of that. How am I going to approach this? I eventually then went to the Pima reservation and asked them, and they had a different take on it. But there was that feedback. There was that pushback to, I was desecrating this very clear mythological piece that is very important to their belief system. So we do have to be careful. We have to be very careful.
Oh yeah, I think that's a great example. And the man in the maze especially, I think you want to be very sensitive to how you use the man in the maze design. And I think it's important to get inclusion of a local tribe or elder or someone that you can, get some feedback with about whether it's appropriate to put in the space, and, if you're going to adapt it, especially, if adapting the design is appropriate as well.
Yeah. Would anyone else like to ask a question of Lars? Or say anything or make a comment? You're welcome.
I have a question.
And what is your name?
I am Chris from Santa Fe.
Hi, hi, Chris.
Hi, and I was just with Clive, and we were doing a labyrinth walk yesterday, and the labyrinth wasn't busy, but it's sort of a diversity question. We had a Tai Chi yoga guy come to walk it, and he was wonderful, and luckily only one other person was walking, but he was doing all of his moves and spent about 20 minutes. And now I'm worried. He wanted to get on our email list, which I loved it. But next week I'm hosting a big equinox walk. And he said, this is what I do. So in a big group, how do I handle if he wants to do that? Because it was sort of a performance he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a little awkward. And it worked with Clive and I because the labyrinth was sort of empty and he did his thing. But in a busy, we're going to be in a really busy labyrinth next week. And if he comes and does his yoga and Tai Chi, and it took over a lot of space.
Right.
So I want to be respectful to him and welcome him. But with a lot of people, that would be, as a hosting the space, how could I gently approach him?
Well, what I would do is, there's different types of walks and events. And so if you are facilitating the walk, then you can create more of a suggested way of using the space. If it's just an open walk for the public and it's like, come between 2 and 4, then that's different and there'd be less kind of guidance. And I would try to err on the side of giving him the space and freedom to have his experience. And if you see that it is a distraction or that it's impeding other people, then I would talk to him after the event. But, for some people, it might be beneficial to have him, or freeing or liberating, to see him doing more expressive moves on the labyrinth. And it might become something that some people enjoy and other people, maybe it is a distraction. But I think as a facilitator, you don't want to assume it's a problem until it seems like it is. And, if he's especially a new member of the community who's just coming, I think, you want to kind of allow him the opportunity. And hopefully he has some self-awareness too, where if it's like, 35 people on the labyrinth, hopefully he'll have some self-awareness as well that, he's in people's way or he's monopolizing the space.
Yeah, I mean, and I would take my cue from him. Like if he comes up to you and says, listen, I'd really like to do my, I was here the other day, I'd really like to do my Tai Chi, would it be is it okay? I would say, would it be all right if you waited to the end, until the end of the, walk the labyrinth like everyone else is, and then we would love for you to do this, but would you mind waiting till the end I often do my Tai Chi on the labyrinth, and I do it first thing early in the morning or late or after the walk. Because I do love doing it on the labyrinth, in the center of the labyrinth. But so I maybe see how he is with you. If he comes up to you and asks, and then say, would you mind just waiting, walk as much as you want with the community, and then do your Tai Chi at the end, or something like that. And
those are great ideas. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Sure, Chris. Thank you for
Actually,
asking.
my mind is actually going the other way. My mind is saying, maybe ask him if he would like to do it prior to everybody else. And then maybe other people will look at that and see if maybe they want to do something a little more creative with their walking,
Oh,
just as an example.
that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Thanks. The
Yeah.
ideas.
Depends on when he shows up. So you have to sort of
Mhm.
go with when
Yeah.
he's going to actually, make him, present himself. So, but good luck with that. That's always, there's always challenges and there are opportunities.
Yeah, it's like a good problem to have because it
Yes.
was beautiful what he was doing.
Yes. Yes.
Right. And when someone comes and it does something differently or they're from a different background, I think it's our initial response might be, oh, this is a problem. Oh, this is a distraction. Oh, this is, not what I thought, not what I wanted this labyrinth walk to be. But then I think you do have to kind of wait a second, take a second level and think, well, is this a problem or is this an opportunity? Is this something that could, bring something new to the labyrinth that wasn't there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Okay, so I have some more questions. So, what would you tell a participant is one way to use the labyrinths to start creating greater diversity in his or her community? I mean, if they had to start with one thing, what would that be? I mean, you already mentioned, and I think this is fabulous, this idea of becoming friends with other people on Facebook who are doing this kind of thing and having them part of the news feed. That's I never thought of that. That's like a no-brainer now to me. Like, of course, what a great idea. It just never occurred to me. So that is something that we all can do to be more aware of different communities that are using labyrinths that we didn't know about. But is there something else? What else would you tell people?
Well, I think one opportunity is to actually try to present a walk in a new environment or location than you typically do. So, if you have a canvas labyrinth, then to, experiment, putting it in a new place, in a place that's different and in background and environment than you normally hold your labyrinth walks. And if you feel uncomfortable, then you can partner with somebody that already is holding an event. If there is some sort of community event or church event or something else, you could, partner with that organization or event and offer the labyrinth there. Or you could move around your walk, which is something that they've begun doing in, I think it's Santa Fe. Lauren Arches was talking with me about this and said that it was really powerful that instead of holding a monthly walk in one location, at one venue, and they have 12 venues. And so over the course of the year, the people from the 12 different venues go and visit each different venue for a monthly labyrinth walk. And that way, it's not the same people in the same venue every month. It's you going to different venues with different people. And then over the course of the year, you get to visit everybody's spaces. So I think that's a really cool model to hear about. So, and putting labyrinths on the beach, chalk labyrinths and playgrounds, and parks and things. I think those are all really good opportunities.
Yeah, that's a great idea to do that in a location. Portland should do that. I mean, because there's so many labyrinths there, and have a different labyrinth at different locations every month. I mean, if you have a city like Santa Fe that has a lot of labyrinths and already there in existence, and it's a great way to create interest so that more labyrinths are created and maybe even just canvas labyrinths bought and available to people. So That's
Yeah,
it.
hopefully
it
there are
possible?
different materials and different designs, and that would engender greater inclusion because you'd have a variety of different types of labyrinths that would resonate with different people.
Yeah. And
Is it possible? Yeah, that's me. Is it possible in areas where there are lots of labyrinths to have like in a city that has multiple labyrinths to have like a labyrinth festival where you would like make a map and people would go from one to another and then have like temporary labyrinths in between to make that path easier to manage, or maybe even design it as a labyrinth. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something like that might work. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Annie, that's been done in Portland, the New England Northwest Labyrinth Guild and the New England, boy, I'm forgetting the name of it, but we had a regional gathering there. We had maps. There are maps on their website, LNN, Labyrinth Network Northwest. There we go. Labyrinth Network Northwest is the organization, and they have maps. They have walking maps of all the labyrinth area, of all the different labyrinths, and they've had regional events, like 2-day events. And I know that the regional reps, the TLS regional reps, are talking about this. What can we do in our region? What are the different groups that we can contact and we can support in creating labyrinth events for their communities? So this is something that's very much a topic of discussion, and certainly has been done in places already, and very successfully. I mean, it was LNN, and now there's another group there that is having labyrinth walks, and they're all in all different areas of the Portland area, as well as further out up the Columbia, up the Dalles, and places like that. So, yeah, but I think it's something that definitely, I agree, that should be looked at in terms of how do we create this in different inlets. I know their Seattle area also does this. There's a Seattle.
So if there was a like a framework or some sort of a structure that you could create, that you could, let's say, put together and like put out into the world, where people in other places, like I know Croatia has a lot of labyrinths, they could create their own labyrinth festival and have like their own mapping or their own festival of their own, like it could be a geocaching kind of thing, which would like totally take this into the technological internet world, which may make it that much more diverse and that much more global.
Yeah, and I think you see that with the Australian group. I mean, they have just run with it, taken the ball and run with it. I mean, they are so active. They have a big gathering there now, once a year, lots of regional stuff. They're training facilitators. They're, so next to the United States and Canada, it's the largest burgeoning area of labyrinth use, I think, in the world. So I think that, using them as examples and then taking it into your own country, I think that I don't know, in terms of a how-to manual, Lars, in terms of, creating, like Janice Lewis created a manual that is based on her Chicago Lights work in her community. It's a very diverse community. It's underserved community in the Chicago area, and she's created a manual for facilitating these types of workshops where labyrinths are used for mindfulness meditation. And it's very specific, but labyrinths are used as a part of this multi-week, I think it's 6-week kind of thing, event. And so this manual is available to other areas who might be wanting something like this, other inner city areas. So that's another suggestion, another way of reaching more diverse communities is creating some kind of manual. But then it's also, it has to be tailored, right, Lars, to the location, to the community, to the location, to what's available there.
Well, there's a difference between a diverse community and a diverse approach. So like, Janice is working with one specific population of, mostly African American, low income urban children. But, that's by itself, it's not diverse. It's not that, African American people are diverse where white people are not. So diversity would be having, many different types of people together in an experience. Or you look at the big picture and you say, well, Janice is working in a diverse community in terms of, the normal spectrum of Labyrinth people. So, I do think that, and Reginald Adams as well, working with high school youth, from urban areas, a lot of people of color, so those are good models for those communities. And, I'd like to take it a step further where we actually, like when Reginald brought the students to the gathering and we had the board where the students were able to share their experiences directly with us was really powerful. And the fact that he's teaching them to build labyrinths so that they can create their own, spaces, hopefully in time as they go to college and become adults, I think is really powerful. So yeah, I'd like to see more of that. That's great.
So can I just, sorry, when you were talking earlier and you were doing your talk, that was actually one of the things that I was thinking about, is that maybe what we should look at also, in addition to all the things that we are currently doing with the facilitating and the walking and the designing and the building, is that it might be more approachable if we take the labyrinth work and incorporate it into what we're already doing. So like Reginald, who is an artist, and he incorporated it into his world, and Janice, who incorporated labyrinths into her world. And I've incorporated into my world in doing what I'm doing, so that it's not something separate from what we do. It becomes a part of who we are, and that people will look at that and be more engaged with that, and that becomes I don't know how to explain. It's just more interesting to people that it becomes, and then they will take it out into their world. It ends up becoming, it reaches out to more diverse people if everybody, it becomes a part of everything.
Yeah, it's about relationships. I mean, the way that this really needs to is the way that this is going to have its greatest effect is if it's done through relationships, and it's personal relationships, with people that are different than ourselves, and within our own community. And I lived in South America on study abroad, so I speak Spanish, and so that's allowed me to reach out to South America, and that's why I chose them as one of the original focuses of my sharing circles, was because I had that bridge already in my background. And there's a difference. One of my biggest takeaways from the diversity training was this difference between transactional and transformational approaches. So a transactional approach is where you invite someone to be a keynote speaker and they present, their work, and then that's over, and, that's the last time you talk to them. And transformational is, engaging them in the work and creating a partnership or something that's ongoing that you're supporting and, involved with, in the long term. And so we really want to think about these strategies for inclusion and equity as transformational, not transactional. And what's fascinating to me was like this whole wake up, epiphany, was when I remembered back to the mission statements of the Labyrinth Society and Veritas. Both the last word for both of our mission statements is transformation. And so, we need to really consider how can we transform our culture, our community, and the organization itself, because it's going to take a commitment and evolution on all levels. I mean, it's about personal transformation, but it's also about organizational transformation. And we really need to be able to understand how the organization itself and community can shift along with our own individual perspectives.
So, so I suggested at the end of the last podcast episode with Frank Fain, I suggested creating a committee consisting of Veritas and TLS members who represent underserved sectors of the global society to sort of brainstorm about this topic. And I think this is a very valuable thing. I mean, we need to look, we're now stepping into the next 20 years. What would that take? What do we need to look at? And that it be a joint committee. This is another thing, like we do with the Worldwide Labyrinth Locator, like we're doing with the app, that this is something that we all, as facilitators and TLS members, those of us who are both in this community, what is this going to look like? How can we uniformly create this transformational, make this a more transformational experience in the next 5, 10, 20 years? Using technology, because that's a perfect example. Veritas has their webinars, and they have their voyages or pilgrimages places, but that's the webinars are accessible to a certain degree, but there's a cost issue, and there's a cost issue with the tours, huge cost issue. So for most people, for many people. And that's an issue with it, when you talk about diversity, and we also face that with TLS, with the membership dues and things like that. And so what would this look like? Perhaps brainstorming about this topic would be a good idea. What do you think?
Well, Veritas, I'm working with both organizations. I'm a faculty member of Veritas. And so when I told them about the training, they invited me to come give a presentation to the staff. And then I did a second presentation to the board about what I learned. And then they have decided to create a exploratory committee about this. So we're actually having our first meeting tomorrow. And I can bring up the idea of inviting TLS into the committee and making it a joint committee. But I'm also wary of committees, because I don't feel like it's just the responsibility of 6 people in a private space to come up with the answers to these questions and to create the suggestions for where to go. I feel like it's really the responsibility of everybody in the organization to consider these things in all regards. And if TLS is going through a strategic planning, I would make diversity and inclusion a very central part of the strategic planning, or even set aside strategic planning and just completely focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and coming up with a strategy on that on all levels, because that will in many ways improve TLS on all fronts, because it is about membership, it's about gathering, it's about the website, it's about the locator, it's about everything we do, workshop, selection committees, so I don't want to do this just with 5 people in a closed space. And that's one of the reasons I came up with this Zoom sharing circle idea was, anybody can be a part of the sharing circle. The sharing circle is recorded and posted on YouTube and live on Facebook. So it's a room that anybody can walk into at any time, and anybody can access. And, if I'm going to be a part of a committee, I want it to be something that's open and engaged with many people, in a different framework than the traditional sense of, these people are going to do this on the side and then tell us what to do.
If you're going to create any kind of plan or equity or committee or anything of any kind that has to do with diversity, you have to bring that equity in. So the people that are involved in it have to be diverse, or it's not going to work.
Right. Exactly. I mean, we already have, we need to talk to people from these underrepresented communities and get their feedback and inclusion and participation.
Well, exactly. What else? What other suggestions did people on the webinar have? On your webinar have? Any?
Well, the webinar was not really moving towards action. Really, these first steps are just awareness and analysis. And so, the goal of my sharing circles was not, what are your solutions? The goal of the sharing circles was to say, what are people, doing out there? What is happening in South America? What is happening with youth? What is happening? I haven't done it yet, but the next one was going to be about disabled community. What's happening? What can we learn from those people in those communities? And then we need to make some analysis. Like, we really need to analyze, where we are. What are the statistics for the membership, for the board, for the locator, for the gathering, so that we have a benchmark, so that in 20 years we can say we have succeeded in diversifying our community. Or, in 5 years we look and we see, oh, we're actually less diverse now than we were 5 years ago. And I actually think that that's the truth. I think TLS is surprisingly even less diverse than it was 3 or 4 years ago.
Have you got, I'm going to just take this somewhere else just very quickly. Do you guys know about my recent project?
Yeah.
Reconciliation Labyrinth?
No, but there is the main group that does that out there. She's actually giving a workshop at the gathering this year. And there are many people who do those kinds of reconciliation labyrinths. That type of thing has been used for years now in war-torn countries, Serbia, Croatia after the war. So that's great, Annie, that you're doing that. That is awesome.
Yeah.
But we don't really have time to focus on.
No, I just wanted to know if you were aware of it. That's all I wanted to know. I'm not going to go into it.
Yeah, I saw it on Facebook. And the video, and it was really inspiring.
Yeah, it really is. Okay. It's so important, and because you need 100, you need 1,000 of them, really, because there's so many hotspots on the planet. There's so many places that are in need of that kind of thing.
I have a bigger, it's going to expand as a bigger project, but the whole basis of that was the coming from the Truth and Reconciliation Act with the Indigenous people in Canada, and that's kind of what drove that.
It's wonderful. It's long overdue, and thank God you're doing it, and hallelujah. So I wish we had that. I mean, it's very important, very, very important. So I'm listening as I'm the podcast, the host, and I'm a board member. And, for me, the issue there, having been on the board now for 5 years, I can't remember now even, it is not, we would love to have people who are younger, who are have different ethnicities, who, you know, and what shows up for that is that people are they've got their lives to deal with. And when you're talking about underserved sectors, much of this is just, you know, I'm going to say lower chakra, making sure that I got a roof over my head, food on the table for me and my kids, work to do, and a place to sleep. You know, there are way more important things that underserved sectors, for the most part, have to deal with than being on a board of a small nonprofit, and or even participating even on a membership level. And you do have this issue. And so we tend to be older. We tend to be either semi-retired or retired, because we don't have to, there are things that we don't have to worry about to a certain degree, some of us. And there are younger people on the board. Katya is younger. She's she's a brand new mom. She's working full time and she's on the board. So there is that. There are people there, but it is not an easy sell, to, and you know, so the reason my idea for a committee is just to look at this. And yes, we are doing strategic planning, and this will definitely be a part of that. It is definitely, that's this whole idea of diversity and inclusivity and equity. And equity for me is fairness, and that is certainly germane for a lot of the areas of how TLS operates. So I am really thrilled to have this conversation and this podcast, as well as the ones that I've had with Frank Fain and with Maya Scott, and also with Toby Evans, who comes in on this at a completely different way, much more transpersonally. But that's also valuable because there are a lot of people out there who value the transpersonal aspects of labyrinth walking solely, and they don't want to be involved with any other way of relating with labyrinths. We have to include that. That has to be a part of the inclusivity and awareness. So I am just thrilled to have these podcasts, and I promise you that I will continue to search out people to come onto these podcasts who are from underserved sectors and have these conversations. This is a platform. It's important to hear what people have to say. And Lars, can you please, on your website or on the TLS website or on the global group, put up this information about the diversity training that you just went through, so other people, if they want to take this, they can at another later date whenever it comes up again, so they have this information for them.
Yeah, it's coming up this spring.
Okay.
I do have one thing to say about the young people don't have time. It's hard because, you know, I do understand that retired people have more resources and time to be on a board, but you know, there are African American retirees, you know, there are men retirees, we have an all women board, you know, and then youth, like I was on the board, and yeah, sometimes my work or family got in the way of participation in being at a gathering. And then it was said, well, you know, he's young and, you know, he has that challenge. But, you know, older people have other challenges. And so like when someone falls and injures themselves and is unable to be at the gathering, you know, we don't say, oh, well, they can't be here because they're old and they fell, you know, we have to be careful about how we, you know, speak about, you know, people's abilities and the assumptions we made about their time, because younger people have more energy in some ways. And so, you know, young people are on boards in many ways. And what I feel like is the challenge is we have this echo chamber of similar backgrounds, ideas, and perspectives, where usually we hire or invite people to the board from committee chairs, and then committee chairs come from the membership, and the membership is 95% similar, and so we are advancing people from within the organization, and then with more of the same people in the roles of the board, and also in the speaking positions at the gathering, because it's like 80% of the people at the gathering have already spoken at a previous gathering. So how do we break out of this echo chamber where we can invite new people into the fold, so that they can participate, and to be careful not to assume that young people aren't interested or don't have the time. Because when I first went to events, when my first time at a Veritas function, I showed up and everybody was like, did your wife bring you here? Where's your wife? And I'm like, no, I'm here because I love labyrinths. I want to learn about them. And they're like, oh, but you're a man. And so there was this like disbelief, like, why are you here? And it took a while for people to actually, I think they thought that I wasn't going to come back, that I would just show up and be like, oh, well, these aren't my people, and then I would leave. But, eventually they did become my people. And, I love the people that are part of the community. I just want to expand it, because I know we're missing out on a lot of great, amazing people from other communities as well.
Yeah, and I think it has to be a bottom-up change. I think the membership has to change. The diversity changes from there. And I think I mentioned Janice because she's working with young people in inner city youth. And so that diversity, it comes from the bottom up, and we are looking at that. I know Janice is in her membership area, and how do we engage more people? We have a lot of people in the global group, but it doesn't translate to more members necessarily. So that is a part of, well, how does the membership broaden so that then we can take from there, then we can encourage people to volunteer, because this is all volunteer. It's all volunteer. So volunteering, and if you have the time, and can you be a part of these committees, and is it something you think you'll find value out of? Because we don't want people not being and wanting to do, doing it and then not finding value for themselves. So it's a volunteer, this volunteer shift in volunteering, and the base, the volunteer base, such that then you have a broader spectrum of people to then choose from for higher levels. Oh, you can do this? Well, can you do this? And can you take on this responsibility? And will you, because, there is that, it's not just about not being able to go to gathering if you're on the board. There are commitments and there are responsibilities, and this is part of being saying yes to accepting being a board member, is accepting all of this, all of the aspects of it, and stuff happens. Stuff happens with everybody. Of course it happens. But there's
plenty of boards. There's plenty of board of directors that are entirely of African American youth. Every board of directors in the world is not just old, or not old. I'm sorry. It's not just retired people, that are white. I think that's.
But you have to look at the organization.
Hold on.
Look at the organization behind it too.
Hold on,
Annie.
I got to time. I know. But I need to do this. I'm going to time you out for just a second. I want to reframe this because this is important. If we're going to outreach to people, what we want to do is reframe the experience. From a country that's really great at volunteering.
Yeah.
We want to give people the benefits of what volunteering is all about. We want to tell them the fun they're going to have, the great reasons that they're going to be involved in all of this. And yes, there's going to be responsibilities.
Yeah.
But you have to reframe the experience.
Yeah.
right?
And I
So
think,
when
yeah, and we do that. We absolutely very much do that when Neil Harris is at least for TLS. But and it's still, as Lars said, when you look at other organizations that have boards that are African American or Chinese or, Hispanic, um, what does the organization represent? Who are they? What is that organization that has those kind of boards on it? And I don't think that we have to go there. I think that what we need to empower is the membership base and making it worthwhile for people to be members and then worthwhile to volunteer. And as you say, reframe it. But you know, we have all of the information. We put it out there, and at the gatherings, especially, and this is going to happen at this gathering, especially for the 20th anniversary. There will be ongoing discussions about volunteering and what that looks like, and how it's beneficial, and how it has helped all of us who have volunteered grow as individually and in our communities. And so, there, all of that is definitely being looked at, and and it's definitely on a very key aspect to how TLS goes forward, and Veritas. You don't have it's not the same structure. Veritas has a very different structure than TLS does. But going forward, these are key aspects but I think it's a bottom up shift. And it's what is being said about the shift from the Piscean AC Aquarian age. It's a bottom up transformation. It's not a top down transformation. So
yeah, but we're at 20 years in. So, if we founded the organization and we were majority white, then we founded the organization, we'd say, okay, it's a bottom up thing. And then in 20 years, let's see what we've done. But, here we are 20 years in, I don't think we have another 20 years to wait for, youth to grow up and become the leaders of the next generation. I think we really need to engage people on all levels right now, so that we are relevant in 5-10 years. Because it's not something we can wait and really grow from, starting with new volunteer pool. We really need to look at, well, who can we get in right now on the board as a keynote speaker, teaching.
Yeah. I understand your frustration, and I understand exactly what you're talking about, but I look at it from the much larger perspective, because I understand that the awareness movement is largely, and I've been in it through other areas, not just the Labyrinth area, but other areas where it's mostly middle-aged white women. And, having that token guy in the room is awesome. But that's usually what it is middle-aged white women. And it's a fascinating dynamic of what's happening there. And it is shifting, but it's shifting slowly. But the other thing that I've noticed is with the Labyrinth that we have in High Park, which I still can't get anything done with because of city politics, and it drives me insane. But that Labyrinth has been there for, I can't remember. It's, I think 15 years, at least. And it's been there for at least a generation of children. So kids go to it's in a part of the park where they go for daycare, they go for summer camps, and it's a part of their experience. So they bus kids in from all over the city, and they go through the park, and they all walk the labyrinths. And there have been kids who have been there since they were in summer camps, and they've now graduated and they're in university, and they all know where that labyrinth is, and they all understand what a labyrinth is, and they've all walked it. So we have an entire generation of children who know what a labyrinth is in the city or outside of the city now that they've gone to university. Because I've talked to some of their parents and they say, oh yeah, my kid, he's now in university. He used to walk that labyrinth. He knows where the Hyde Park Labyrinth is. So we have those kids. We know who, I sort of know who they are. My problem is I have no way of gathering them because I don't have the political issue I have with the labyrinth and the park, and they are not allowing me to put any signage up that will allow me to gather people. I have no way of creating a group that I can gather people with. So it's like outside of the Facebook page that people will have to figure out how to get to. I have no way of bringing these people who have known about this, thousands of people, together to have them come. But on any given solstice or equinox, there's at least 4 or 5 groups of people who actually come and use that labyrinth throughout the day. Because I went there and sat there one day, all day long, and watched all the different groups come in and use it throughout the day. Very diverse, different groups of people. It's fascinating to me. Like I can watch and I can write you, stories about all the different things that I've seen happen in that labyrinth in the middle of the city. But I have no way of documenting and telling you everything because I can't prove it.
Yeah, well, you could make a business card with your group or your website or your Facebook page, and you could hand your business card to people, that you meet there, and you could.
I would literally have to be standing there all the time there, and I can't do that. I don't have the time to do that. I understand what you're saying, like on the equinoxes and the
right.
solstices, I could do that, but I mean,
on the big days,
literally every day. Yeah.
No, I'm not saying stand out there all the time. I'm saying, on that equinox, if you know that that's a peak day of people being there and you want to create a community around the labyrinth, then, I would introduce yourself. And if you're just out there walking every once in a while, you just have your cards ready. So when you meet somebody, you engage them. And, I don't know what the poster laws are, but, maybe you could.
Not good. Yeah, I know. It's very frustrating. It's been 5, 6, 7 years I've been trying to crack this nut, and it's been driving me crazy.
And what about?
Well, we'll think about it.
It's there.
We should post it on the Facebook group and have people respond on there with ideas and suggestions.
Yeah, because we're really over time here. So
yes, I'm sorry.
I have to sort of stop this. But Annie, there are also always posted message boards at all the colleges and universities. And a picture of the labyrinth. Do you walk this labyrinth? Do you want to start a labyrinth group? There are ways to
That's
do
not
it.
A bad idea.
To do it in the universities themselves. They have message boards everywhere in the communal halls, near the food courts. And I know from Marymount University, they had a labyrinth group, the university is being sold there in Portland, but they had a labyrinth group, and they ended up getting a labyrinth on the campus there because of the group. So I would go into those places. You want those college kids, and you want them, go into those places and see if there isn't an interest there. That's
actually not a bad idea. I like that idea. Yeah,
that's a great idea. And then, another thing is just searching online for people posting images from that location. On Instagram, you can search by location. You can search on Facebook.
I have a Twitter feed. Yeah. I have a Twitter feed on the Facebook page.
Search for other people's posts and then comment on their posts and say, hey, join our group, or hey, we're holding a walk next month, or, that's how I did research about, African American labyrinths, just searching online, or, I'm wondering, are there labyrinths in Mexico? You just start searching Labyrinto in Mexico and you start finding information about that, so it's, searching online is a great way to connect with people that are using the labyrinth that you don't, otherwise wouldn't be able to find. Using
the technology is Another, sorry, baby boomer hard thing to do, and I've learned so much. But yeah, it's what Lars is saying is it's there. It's there to be
Yeah.
used, and we can really get connected to people that way, especially Instagram. I think that's a big one. My daughter, her age, the millennials, they use Instagram. So I think that is a key way of finding people who are walking labyrinths and posting pictures and stuff like that. Great idea, Lars. Thank you.
Cool.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Annie. So if you wouldn't mind muting yourself, we're going to end this wonderful podcast. Lars, do you have anything else you want to say? I mean, the topic can go on. We can go on and on about this, and I just want to thank you so much. It's really been.
That we ended up with on our.
It's
no answering.
There isn't an answer. There isn't an answer.
The three questions are.
Go ahead.
How can I leverage my privilege to create more equity within my organization? What am I willing to give up to create a more equitable organization? What needs to change in my organization to make it more welcoming and inclusive? And I'll post those questions on our group. So
great. Please. Yes, please. That'd be great. Thank you, Lars. Thank you so much. I mean, it's really been a pleasure. I mean, we could spend hours talking about this. And I will do my best to get on your next webinar. For some reason, Tuesdays midday was hard for me up to now. So hopefully that's changed. Depends on my grandkids' schedule. But I really appreciate this. Lars, can't wait to see you at the gathering. And it's really been a pleasure. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Christiana. I really appreciate this podcast.
Yeah. Thank you. And many continued blessings on your path. So you've been listening to Labyrinth Society's Many Paths, Many Visions on GoToMeeting and broadcast by Spreaker with your host, Christiana Brinton. Be sure to check the Labyrinth Society website, media area, Facebook page, global group, YouTube, and Google Plus for a list of upcoming dates and guests. So we're going to take a little bit of a breather through the gathering, and then I'm going to restart this afterward with hopefully with guests from the gathering, people who are doing workshops and doing things in their communities, preferably that I don't know about, because that always makes it much more interesting for me. And I'm going to make diversity and inclusivity and equity a key proponent of that. And so we'll see what I can come up with as far as guests. And if you know anybody out there, have people that you think I should be having on this podcast as my guest, please don't hesitate to email me. You can email me via TLSPR at labyrinthsociety.org, and let me know who you think would be a good person to have on. And if this podcast has piqued your interest in the Labyrinth Society and you'd like more information about membership, please go to www.labyrinthsociety.org/membership. Ciao, namaste, and may you find what you need on your path through life.